Good afternoon, everyone. I want to make sure that we don't take up too much of your time in the middle of closed week when I know you have many other things going on. And I want to thank you for joining us for what will become traditional that we have at least 2 of these meetings per semester, maybe more if needed. I certainly, again, encourage you to talk with your faculty senators if you have questions that come up in between assemblies, and we can certainly try to get those answered as well. Those of you that are viewing us from Meridian in Twin Falls, and also in Twin Falls, hello to all of you. If you have questions during the question and answer period, if you just raise your hand, then we will make sure that we get those questions answered as well. And we have Darren posted right in front of the video so that he can see all of you in case you have a question while we're moving forward here. I want to just, I've commented on these in the past. The historical photos that we have scattered throughout these assemblies are really to just make the case that ISU has been here for a long time. Its predecessor, of course, founded in 1901, the Idaho Academy, which was a vocational institution for Southeast Idaho. 1901 for the state of Idaho is quite early. It's about 10 years after statehood. So there wasn't a whole lot of educational opportunities, higher educational opportunities in Idaho at that time. So the Idaho Academy represented a very progressive move in the direction of higher education for Pocatello, and there has been continuous accreditation at an institution in Pocatello since 1901. Just a few things that we want to accomplish today. I certainly want to request faculty support and input on important decision making that is going on in the provost's office and throughout the organization, and I'll talk a little bit more about plans to do that. We'll update you on ISU's strategic planning process. As you know, we have our vision statement out for review. Ben Crosby and Jennifer Atterbury have graciously joined me today to talk a little bit about that process and about the working group's hard work on the vision statement and other elements of the strategic plan. And then I will talk a little bit about Institutional Effectiveness Council. We talked about that last time. There have been some questions about who is on that council and what its role is and what its decision-making authority is, and I can address that today as well. So I want to start out with an idea that I had a long time ago, actually, and am ready to implement now, but I would like your feedback. So I'm asking you all to provide feedback. You can do that directly at my email, if you'd like, at woodlaur@isu.edu, WOODLAUR @isu.edu. And there's certainly other ways to get feedback as well. If you don't want to email me directly, you can email your faculty senate representative or faculty senate chair. Paul Watkins has graciously joined us today. This idea is about utilizing the intellectual capacity that resides in the faculty. You are all subject matter experts in your area, and institutions are very fortunate in that we have that intellectual capacity on campus. The ability to use it to address university initiatives and projects is something that I would like to do more effectively. And so I'm asking for your feedback on this idea of project action teams that would be comprised of faculty. They would have faculty chairs that would populate these committees. Now, some of them would have administrative support, or they would have administrator members as well, or staff, depending on what the project team was focused on. These will be focused on either short-term initiatives that the institution is exploring or has been asked to implement. That does, of course, happen if the State Board of Education decides that we're implementing For example, if we'd had these in place when the State Board of Ed mandated all of the institutions to implement a program prioritization process, we could have had a faculty program prioritization project team. So those things come up. So it could be mandatory initiatives, or it could be ongoing challenges that the institution faces. As you all know, higher ed is in a pretty dramatic period of transition nationally. Certainly state institutions have different challenges than private institutions do, but these challenges are consistent across all of the sectors of higher ed and certainly across the nation as a whole. And I don't have to tell you what those are. You all know what those challenges are at the local level as well as globally. These include continuing to make the case for the value of what we do as academics and why it matters globally, why it matters holistically, why education provides not just job opportunities for our students, but it enriches our communities and provides stability for the democratic system that we are all fortunate to be part of. So those larger concerns about higher education certainly are ongoing nationally, and these project teams could be focused on some of those challenges: retention, student success, recruiting, and any other kinds of more narrow initiatives that might come up. Some of these teams I envision meeting for multiple years. Some of them I envision meeting for 3 weeks, depending on what it is they're doing. Now, this sounds broad and undefined at this time, and it is. So this is a brainstorming effort that I'm having with you all, and I'm asking for some feedback on whether you think this would work, whether you would like to participate in such a thing, and it's certainly not a requirement. So if you're thinking, I really don't want another committee, and I don't want this to be just another committee, certainly it's entirely up to you. But I do think we have intellectual capacity on campuses that administrators can do a better job of utilizing for the challenges that we all face collectively. And I would like some feedback on this concept. Go ahead. But this is not just another committee assignment, as I noted. The last thing I want to do is add to the workload of faculty. The absolute last thing I want to do. So this is not the goal here. The goal here would be for these teams to decide themselves what their work product was, certainly in consultation with the provost's office. In some cases, that might be more prescribed than in others, but it could be a white paper, it could be a research project, it could be just some feedback. You all meet and you determine that there are some things we could do better, there are some things that maybe we're not doing that we should be doing, and so forth. Go ahead. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Hi, I'm Kathleen Kangas, and is this on? I'm happy to respond. I think it sounds like an excellent idea. I think many of us would like to have input and would like to do it on an efficient group, a group formed for a specific purpose, and I love that idea. I have just one concern or one caution as you go forward. I've been at ISU for quite a while. Remember a previous president, and I do remember a time when it felt like some faculty committees were formed and there was a suspicion that sometimes it was actually an attempt for the administration to handpick the faculty members who would then proceed in a way that they wanted. So as long as you had some way of making sure that that was not happening, perhaps you would just like each of these groups to be reported to Faculty Senate and allow Faculty Senate an opportunity to comment on the makeup or the assignment given. As long as this is not a way to go around faculty governance, I think it would be an excellent idea, and I'd like to support that.
Thank you, Kathleen. I appreciate that feedback. And certainly, if you wouldn't mind, Kathleen, just sending me a couple of bullet points about that. Any other feedback you may have about this, feel free to send it to me. As Kathleen notes, I think very Importantly, this would not be a way to circumvent governance structures on campus or in any way circumvent the governance structures we have in place, but would be an alternate way to invest in these challenges that the institution faces from time to time and also ongoing in a way that could benefit the campus community as a whole. So moving on to our strategic planning effort. As you know, we have been undertaking a strategic planning process. This is something that we needed to do. Our strategic plan had been in place for a number of years, about a decade, I think. And so it needed to be updated to reflect changes in the institution, but also changes that had been required of both our Northwest Commission accreditor, regional accreditor, and also the State Board of Ed, which has revised its own strategic planning processes. So I wanted to give you an update on where we are with that. We have had a lot of questions about the vision statement, which has been sent out for review, and how it fits with the existing framework that we have in place, the mission statement, which was approved through a similar feedback process last year, and the core themes, which have been in place now for a number of years, but were updated last year through a feedback process as well. Our core themes are actually required by the Northwest Commission. The Northwest Commission requires that all institutions have core themes. The core theme language comes from them. This is a Northwest accreditation invention, the core theme idea. And all of the institutions that are accredited under the Northwest Commission have core themes. 99%, and Paul may know for sure, 99% of the institutions that have this requirement under the Northwest Commission have either 3 or 4 core themes. This is just the way it is. Nobody has 2 because that would be too few. And the view is that more than 4 is too many. So we have 4. And I'm just going to run through what they are quickly as a reminder. Now the core themes are not cut in stone here. But I will remind all of you that they are approved by the Northwest Commission and also by the State Board of Ed. So they're not something we want to change on a routine basis because that does require quite a bit of approvals for the institution to go through. And when we went through our process last year to review the core themes, we got a lot of feedback on the language that supported the core themes, but the vast majority of the feedback supported the core themes themselves. So that was reassuring to go through that process. But like I said, the core themes are not set in stone. They can be adjusted over time, of course. And they are reflective of the mission. And the language the Northwest Commission uses is that the core themes must, quote, fall out from the mission. So you can't have a core theme that seems to come from nowhere if the mission statement does not, for example, say anything about learning and discovery, which would be hard to imagine, frankly. A mission statement that didn't in some way address learning and discovery, but you have to at least demonstrate how it does that. So that's just a reminder for how these fit in with the mission. And our core themes are learning and discovery, access and opportunity, leadership in the health sciences, and community engagement and impact. Now, the core themes are used by the Northwest Commission to measure the effectiveness of the institution, and we will have indicators that demonstrate that when the Northwest Commission comes back in just 6 years now. Part of our strategic planning process is to manage not just how we demonstrate mission fulfillment, which is the term the Northwest Commission uses, but also institutional effectiveness broadly. And so I wanted to just talk briefly about, and I know this is overwhelming, so that's why we have the post here about where we have posted this so that it can be accessed by all of you if you're so inclined. I am not going to go through all the detail here, except to say that The institutional vision drives the aspirations of the institution. It's where we want to go institutionally. The mission is what we are doing, who we are, and how we are doing it, and essentially. And the core themes are expressions of that mission. More specifically, the vision that we have out for review now is on this representation is the root system. It's the stability of the system. Our working group worked on this representation to try to express how all of these elements fit together. But the vision is where we want to go. The mission is who we are and what we're doing. The core themes are part of that expression of mission. Eventually, we'll have strategic objectives that the group is working on that are more focused on how we get to the vision and fulfill our mission. How'd I do, Darren? Okay. And fortunately, we have a very large working group of people who have spent a tremendous amount of time on all of these issues, who are working through that, talking about who we are as an institution, how we can be better, what we need to focus on in terms of moving forward. And two of those individuals have joined me today, Jennifer Atterbury and Ben Crosby, who have been very kind in giving of their time to that committee, and also to join us here today to talk about the vision statement that's out for review and how their working group came to this vision statement and what it means to the working group. And I'll turn it over to them for a few minutes.
I'm Jennifer Atterbury. I'm a professor of English, and I'm serving on the strategic working group as a representative of the College of Arts and Letters. The group is about 50 faculty and staff from across campus. We were nominated by our college deans or by our unit heads to try to create a representative group. The group also includes the two faculty senate co-chairs. And I would characterize the faculty involvement as perhaps the most lively and talkative at our meetings. To date, we have worked on a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. The vision statement that you see here, objectives, which are still in draft form, and we're going to be moving on to strategic goals and actions. The draft objectives pinpoint areas where we feel the university as a whole needs to move forward in its work over the next few years. And they are going to focus on identity, internal communications, recruitment, retention, and community partnerships. The exact language is still being worked on. We want to thank you for the comments that have been sent in to date on the vision statement, and remind you that the comment period is still open. It'll be open until December 16th, the end of the semester. So, a couple of comments on the nature of a vision statement. A vision statement is future-oriented, and that makes it different, as Laura said, from a mission statement. A mission statement is what we do. A vision statement is what we want to become. So the draft vision statement does not replace ISU's already existing mission statement and its already existing core themes. Those core themes and mission statement are much more specific. Secondly, I want to comment on the scope of our work. The scope of our work is university-wide, and I want to really compliment the members of the strategic planning group on having kept it at that level. What that means is we are not privileging any one college, any one division, or any one unit. We're trying to speak to the whole. And it's a pretty difficult thing to do without becoming generic. So let me tell you just a little bit about the process used to develop the vision statement, and then I'm going to comment on the language choices that we made and the audience that we feel we have for this. And Ben is going to then talk about its connotations and implications. At the very first stage of developing this, we met in small groups, and each one of us individually wrote a headline for what we envisioned a really good moment for ISU in the future. Then in our small groups, we consolidated those headlines into a headline per table. Then we voted on those headlines, and the top vote getters had the phrases that we tried to work with to craft a final statement representing the sentiment of the whole group. That effort failed. Not for any particular reason. I think we were just tired at the end of the day. That first draft was reviewed by the Institutional Effectiveness Council, and they suggested some tweaking, send it back to us, and at that point, everyone in the room sort of felt like it should be scrapped and we should start over, but not from the very beginning. What we did in the second stage was have a small group. It was 3 faculty, 4 staff, and 1 student, and it represented all of the campuses. Get together again and go back to all those original headlines. We looked at them holistically for repeated themes across the initial work. And the key ideas that emerged in those initial headlines included connection, community, excellence, innovation, creativity, changing lives and fostering student opportunity, and our locations in Idaho and reaching out from our locations to the communities of which we are a part. So using those key ideas, we attempted to create a future-oriented, proud, direct, forceful, and intentionally simple statement that identifies how we strive to be distinct, our potential contribution. Now, the language choices, we were thinking of a broad and potentially public audience, not just an internal audience. So what you see here is a single, simple sentence, short enough to be recited from memory. In the first half, you're looking at words that are mainly from the Old English concrete side of the English language, choice, tomorrow, leader. And in the second half, where we're talking more about abstractions, you are encountering words from the Latinate abstract side of the English language. But we still tried to keep those words clear, communicative, and understandable to a broad audience. And as Ben will explain, each word in the statement can be unpacked to reveal a cluster of meanings, all of which resonate with our academic mission. Now, I'm going to just point to one example, and Ben's going to tell you more, but take the word university. In spite of its existence in some rather odd forms today, university, I think, still is a high-level educational institution with several colleges and therefore having a complex mission. Universities accomplish teaching, research, and service. They have undergraduate and graduate programs. They have liberal arts, sciences, and professional programs. And we've attempted then, by using that one word, to encapsulate all those meanings without having to have series after series after series embedded in the statement. The statement has only one modifying phrase, and it is intentionally ambiguous. Is it the leaders who are making these creative connections, or the university, or is it both? The statement has only one series in it, within which the 3 words are carefully chosen, and Ben will be expanding upon the interrelationships of these ideas as we conceive of them. And finally, it is not a slogan. It is not Go Bengals. It actually implies measurable results that can be related to our strategic objectives. So, Ben?
Thanks, Jennifer, for that great setting of where this came from. My role in today's meeting is to walk through with you each of these phrases. And my goal when we go through this is that I hope that you can see yourself in this vision statement, that you can see your unit, that you can see the classes that you teach, that you can see the students that you interact with in each of these individual phrases. This is not just a statement for students. It's not a statement for faculty. It's not a statement for its administration. It's a statement for all of us And I want to emphasize that as we go through each of these. So let's start with the first phrase, right? Idaho State University, we'll leave that, is the university of choice. Right? What does that mean to be the university of choice? Right? That implies that people are electing, desiring, they're wanting to be here, right? And that is a really important thing, that people aren't coming to ISU, either as faculty or staff or students, because it's their last choice, because it's the only one that they have to choose from, but because they want to be here, because we offer them something special that fits what they're looking for, right? To be the university of choice, you have to offer something that nobody else does for them, right? That it provides them with that unique thing that they're looking for, people wanting to be here. Okay, so that's this university of choice part. The next phrase, right? The university of choice for tomorrow's leaders, right? For tomorrow's leaders. What does that imply? Well, in discussions with a few folks here at the university, we started to ask questions about what ISU uniquely can accomplish relative to some of our neighboring institutions and other choices that people in our service region might have available to them. And we felt that being able to offer a strong leadership-oriented sort of training, a university that is the right scale where you can actually participate and have an impact in whether that is as a faculty member in terms of helping out in the governance of the university, whether that's as a student in terms of being able to create clubs and enact change, right? Where students have the opportunities to try on that role as leaders. Right? That we are a school that is of a scale, like if you had been at a giant university, where there's 100,000 students or something like that, you would not have those kinds of opportunities. But we have the right scale and the right sort of structure where people who want to take advantage of those can. Okay, and this is also true if you read this statement from the interpretation of a faculty member like myself, right? When I read this, ISU is the university of choice for tomorrow's leaders. And maybe I might, somewhere in my egotistical brain, imagine myself as playing some role as a leader as well. And that might be a leader either within the university, or that might be a leader within my discipline, right? The community of practice that I participate in. And so this idea of leadership is not just about students, learning how to be leaders, but our faculty being leaders within the university, our faculty being leaders within their academic disciplines as well. Right? So this is, when I say I want you to envision yourself within this, this isn't just about students, it's not just about admins, it's about all of us. And I think I as faculty see myself in this. Okay, so university of choice for tomorrow's leaders, creatively connecting is the next phrase I'm going to work with. Right? So for creatively connecting, the idea with this phrase is that we wanted to emphasize, because this is future-oriented, this is aspirational. Right? The idea of creatively connecting is that we aren't going to resolve problems using the same pat solutions that have come up before in the past. That we're going to be asking ourselves hard questions about whether or not the way that we have been doing things is effective and is efficient and is best for our students or best for our staff or best for our faculty. Right? The idea of creatively doing something means doing it in a way that hasn't been done before, right? That might accomplish something that we haven't been able to do up till now. Part of that aspirational portion of this. But what are we connecting? What are we creatively connecting? And now it brings us to the 3 points on the triangle. As Jennifer pointed out, these were carefully selected. And it wasn't like we sat down and said, okay, let's find 3 things to put on the triangle, right? We had come up against, over and over again, what is ISU doing for our community? What is ISU doing to generate ideas? What is ISU doing to take advantage of opportunities, to create opportunities, right? And we kept coming up against these terms over and over again, and so we decided that we would have a list. We would have a brief listing at the end, this connecting communities, ideas, and opportunities. But what's important about this list is it's not just A, B, and C, and we do each thing independently. And the double-barbed arrows that are on this triangle are essential to the interpretation of this vision statement. Okay? The double-barbed arrows suggest that community doesn't exist independently on its own, but that we are connecting community to ideas, we're connecting community to opportunity, and then in the other direction, opportunity to community, ideas to community. It's a two-way coupling between each of these three terms. And this is really important. So let's go through some of these just to make sure we have them under control. So what does community mean? Well, community in its most sort of straightforward and obvious sense means, Pocatello or Meridian or Twin or IF, right? It's the place where we live. It's the shareholders that we serve, right? The people that we take care of. It could be our local region. But when we talk about communities as well, it could be communities within the university, crossing between disciplines. It could be communities within our discipline, right, that we are helping make connections within. So it's not simply just Pocatello, Meridian, Twin, right, but other kinds of community as well. The other part of this, ideas. Right? Now, ideas are essentially the intellectual product that one can come up with. And when I was an undergraduate, I worked with this guy named Walter who was so inspirational. I would go to a group meeting and he would say, I've got a new idea. And he would lay out this beautiful sort of scientific plan. And then I would go and start working on it. And I would come back to him 2 days later and he would have another idea completely different that he would ask me to do. And then I would come back and he would have a totally different idea. And some people truly are idea factories. And ideas are wonderful because they allow us to grow, they allow us to change, they allow us to do things. But the problem with ideas is if they are ideas alone, they go nowhere. Right? They have to find a way of being implemented. And the implementation of ideas happens through identifying opportunity and taking advantage of opportunity. And so you may think of opportunity, maybe I think of it simply as a faculty member, as a researcher, as a call for proposals. Right? An opportunity is essentially a way that I can take what I have in my ideas and actually enact them. Right? Opportunities are that vehicle to accomplish ideas. Right? So this is that connection between these. None of these stands independently on their own. And I think that basically summarizes the three different points. The idea of their interconnectedness, the coupling that exists between each of these three words. I don't want you to think of them simply as a list, but as a feedback loop, right? That community affects the ideas that we might come up with as a university. But the ideas that we come up with at the university also benefit our communities. It goes both ways on each of these arrows. Okay? And I think that is where I'll wrap up, but I want you just, as you stew on this, to ask yourself, where do I see myself within this vision statement? Can I find a home for what I do, what I care about, what I want to accomplish within this vision statement? And hopefully you can. So that's it.
I think you can see why I wanted Ben and Jennifer to talk about this with you all, because they've given so much thought and really open dialogue with their colleagues has occurred around this vision statement. And so I just want to thank them for their effort for sharing that with us today, and also for our working group, some of you are members of, and to reiterate that has been a really intensive effort. And as Jennifer said, not all of their planning efforts have been successful. So there have been some challenging times on the working group, and I just want to thank them for their support. Thank you. And we do have a couple of minutes for questions for Jennifer and Ben. If there be specific questions about that vision statement, we have them here. They don't, they will say they don't represent the entire thinking of the working group, but certainly if you have specific questions about it, we could address those here, should there be any. I want to remind you all that we are still accepting feedback on the vision statement. We have had a lot of it so far. I don't know exactly, like 50 pages worth approximately. So lots of feedback has come in about this vision statement from the university community, but also our communities at large. And if you want to provide feedback still, you can do it in these various ways at the IAC email address, iac@isu.edu. Faculty Senate, Representatives, Staff Council, Strategic Planning. Some of you have emailed me directly. Certainly we're not sharing with the working group the names of the people who have provided feedback. We're simply categorizing the feedback and sharing that with the working group, who will be going back to the working group in January, I believe, and to talk about that feedback. So if you are interested in providing comments, certainly we're still accepting those. And if you have questions about this process, you can reach me or any of the folks who've been working on it as well. I wanted to speak a little bit about the Institutional Effectiveness Council. We've had questions about this. We mentioned it last time. I talked a little bit about what the IAC Steering Committee's charge was when we met at our Faculty Assembly last time. But I thought I would just address a few questions that we've had about the IAC. This is the steering committee membership, the voting membership that we're listing here, so that you can see who's actually on the steering committee. This organization body was created in the wake of our 7-year site visit from our accreditor, the regional accreditor, the Northwest Commission, who had issued several recommendations related to planning processes at ISU and planning mechanisms that were not fully integrated. So one of the recommendations that we received, for example, had to do with an integrated planning process that needed to be put into place. The recommendation was explicitly that we had to integrate our planning processes with each other, our facilities planning process, our IT planning process, the academic program planning process, the budget planning process. All of these needed to be integrated into a single planning process at some point in the institution, so that we didn't have these siloed efforts that were sometimes duplicating one another or effectively at cross purposes from each other. And so that was the intention of the creation of the Institutional Effectiveness Council, was to meet that integrated planning requirement. This is an advisory group that meets to address some planning issues and makes recommendations to the president. It has, for example, created a rubric for analyzing the prioritization of IT projects, of which we have hundreds of IT projects into the future. It has created a rubric to analyze how to prioritize those, because we only have so much IT staff, and the IT group needed some guidance on how to prioritize the projects that were coming to it, how to determine if this was something that impacted enrollment, for example, if we were implementing the content resource system that we've implemented, for example, in enrollment management. It needed a lot of IT support. IT needed some guidance on how to prioritize those projects. Was it something a program needed for accreditation, and so forth? So this body has created a rubric. It consulted with deans and chairs and program directors about the IT projects that they had on their list, and then it prioritized them using the rubric that was approved by the steering committee, as an example of the kind of planning that this body is doing. It's also the budget committee for the institution at this level now, and that is because it has this broad oversight to ensure that our resource allocation reflects the mission of the institution. And that is one of the charges of this body, is to ensure that mission fulfillment is appropriately resourced. And so if we're making decisions about resource allocation, we have to ask the question, is this a mission? Does this meet the mission? Does this meet eventually we'll have a vision, And does this meet the vision, the aspirations of the institution? And so this body is collectively addressing that conversation. There are a number of ways to interact with this group, and those are multiple for different constituents. We are adding staff council to IAC. Faculty Senate chairs have representation. We have faculty representation on all the subcommittees, and you can see those here too. We've listed the subcommittees, just not the membership of those committees. But certainly we have faculty membership on those subcommittees. So if you're interested in serving in some capacity here, you can certainly ask us if we have filled all the slots. And the next time you get an email from your dean saying that she or he is looking for volunteers for the core theme 1 subcommittee, for example, you'll know how this relates to the IAC in total. Certainly I can answer any questions as well about this as we go forward. We have a few minutes for questions, and I've already had some questions from some of you, and people have emailed me questions as well. So I'm just going to start with those that I already have, and they may be questions that you have as well. We have had questions about the fiscal year 2018 budget process. As you may know, the deans have been given some budget information for FY18 and have been asked to start preparing to submit their budget recommendations for the FY18 year, which starts in July of 17. That budget process, as we mentioned before in the Faculty Assembly, reflects a revenue decline due to our enrollment was off only 0.5%. So we had a 0.5% reduction in enrollment overall, which was quite good considering that we lost about 500 international students. But that international student decline represents a revenue decline that we will be adjusting for in FY18. Now, a couple of things about that revenue decline is not a one-to-one. Not all of the Saudi and Kuwaiti tuition, which is what predominantly represents that enrollment decline, was in appropriated recurring budgets. So some of it was one time. Some of it was expended as one time, and some of it went to support one-time initiatives that won't recur as expenses. So what we did in order to prepare for the FY18 budget cycle was to run the analysis on the expenses and the revenue, all of the revenue that has been generated across the campus. As the vast majority of that, as I'm sure you know, is in the academic units, generating about, it's above 95% of the revenue, which is in tuition and fees. And then we ran the expense data as well. We ran expense data to determine where we had growth in expenses during the period of increased tuition. And that gave us some baseline data about how to address this revenue shortfall. That baseline data has all been shared with the vice presidents and with the deans. The deans have been asked to make a budget adjustment that is lower than the adjustment that we're going to make on the non-academic side. We determined that the majority of the growth in the institution during this period that we looked at of 3 to 4 years was in the non-academic areas. As a result, we need to bring down overhead. We need to bring down our overhead expenses as an institution. And so that process will be going forward in the non-academic units. For the academic units, we've asked our deans to adjust budgets that represent overall about 2% of the expenditures in the academic programs, but also to look at reallocation, because we need to reallocate resources to support opportunities for growth. And we want to incentivize growth as well, incentivize program growth, and program opportunity. And so I think the more difficult thing on the academic side in this process is really that reallocation effort to support growth. This is not an across-the-board reduction. This is not an across-the-board approach to a budget planning process for FY18. That's a lot easier to do, frankly, and if Brian Hickenlooper, our CFO, was here, he would tell you that this is a heavy lift. It's a heavy lift on the finance side of the house to produce all this data that we've requested, and in class fees as well. Some of you asked about class fees. Are we appropriately using our class fees? Well, we're looking at that. And some of our class fees go back to 1968. I'll just be honest about what we're dealing with here historically. So we're looking at class fee allocations, how we're using that money. We're looking at local and appropriated dollars. The adjustment between what we're needing to get to in FY18 for the institution as a whole is about a 5% reduction in expenses between FY17 and FY18 across the entire campus. That would include local accounts, and for appropriated budgets, it's more like 8%. Now, this is not an easy thing to do, but it's also not a crisis. So it's something that we can achieve using. We have reserves that we're utilizing in FY17 to buy us this time to make these more strategic decisions. So that's the broad overview. You will all be, and our goal, and what Brian Hickenlooper and we visited Faculty Senate, what we're telling deans and chairs and directors on the non-academic side is that we want this to be an inclusive process, that they will be receiving this data, and that we want this to be an inclusive, across-the-board conversation about how to meet this requirement, how to readjust our budget, and how to continue to achieve our goals as an institution. So you should be receiving more information about this at the local level that's more, that pertains to your own areas, and there will be multiple ways to participate in that process. We will be on the academic side. The academic recommendations will go to the Faculty Senate before they go to the IAC, so the Faculty Senate has the opportunity to see what the academic areas are recommending. And so we'll make sure that that process happens. Now, the budget process itself is largely driven by external factors. Our budget is due to the state board in April. The tuition setting board meeting, the board is responsible for setting tuition for all of the institutions. That is in April as well. But our recommendation for the tuition has to be to the board a month before the April meeting, which will be about mid-March. So we'll be looking at tuition increases. Of course, we don't want to increase tuition. But so we'll look at healthcare costs. We'll look at those fixed costs that we know we'll have, and we'll try to keep tuition increases very low for students. And certainly that's the state board's request of all of us as well. And ISU's tuition increases have been getting increasingly smaller over time, and that is certainly a goal that we're trying to maintain as well in this process. The governor gives his state of essentially state of the state address in January, in which he'll outline his budget priorities for the upcoming legislative session, and then the Joint Appropriations Committee will make their decisions by probably, we hope, by March, around March. So we'll have more information about all of this and bring that all to you in an assembly in February is our plan. Other questions that I have received include also about the faculty constitution. I know some of you have been talking with Faculty Senate about that. I have met with Faculty Senate as well about the constitutional process. As you know, Faculty Senate sent a constitution out for review last spring and to a vote, and that did not succeed at the faculty vote level. And so Senate has had a conversation about how they want to proceed there. I just want you all to know that the Provost's office is supportive of the Senate's decision my understanding is that they're going to move forward with a task force, probably structure. Paul is here, and he can certainly correct me if I am leading you astray here. But I want you all to know that while the Provost's office is not prescribing something to the Senate, and we're not telling the Senate that we want them to do anything in particular related to this, we are supportive of a faculty constitution process. We will support that. We're not telling the Senate that certain drafts are not appropriate for consideration. That's not happening here. So I just want you all to know that we're supportive of the Faculty Senate's constitutional process, and we'll wait to hear from Senate about how they decide to move forward. If you are interested in that, I know that they're welcoming comments from faculty about that process. We've had questions about the RISE complex. As you know, unfortunately, we've had layoffs in the RISE facility. We are reviewing the RISE operation. We're also reviewing the facilities space as well as part of a facilities space planning process that's being undertaken. We're expecting to receive the comprehensive evaluation of the RISE facility within the next week. We haven't received that evaluation yet from our internal auditor, whose work we're expecting him to complete that. I don't want to speak for him either, but he's expecting to wrap up his piece of that investigation in the next probably in the next week or so. So we'll have more information as soon as he completes that work. In the meantime, we're also going forward with looking at opportunities in the RISE facility and evaluating the facility itself for new opportunities, not just new opportunities externally, but new opportunities for space allocation campus-wide, including some instructional opportunities as well. And then we've had questions also about the ongoing lawsuit situation that we have that's been in the newspaper, Pokorny v. ISU. That is still pending in the courts, and unfortunately I can't speak to it at this time. But it continues to be pending in the courts, and there was a question about whether that had come to a conclusion, and it is still pending. And I think that covers it for the questions that I had in advance. So certainly we have a few minutes and we can take additional questions.
Thanks. Thanks so much for meeting with us the second time this semester. It's really really welcome. And so I just wanted to comment on the vision statement in conjunction with the comments about the budget. First of all, I really appreciate the vision statement, and I also appreciate the effort to create a collaborative conversation around the vision statement, something that the entire university can get around. And I also personally really like the statement, and it's not just because I work with Jennifer, but and I like words like Old English and Latinate and clauses and such. But but I like the statement because I think it's serious. And it's inspiring, and I can see myself in it. So what I want to say, though, is that behind that statement are two things to meet that vision. One is infrastructure, and the other is operating budgets. And my concern in connection now with the budget itself is that the vision statement, if we can all come around it, really exposes ISU in the sense that it's something memorable for us and for the public to get behind. But without an operating budget and infrastructure, it also exposes us potentially to parity and scathing criticism. And so I just want to make sure that there can be an effort to recover and even augment our budgets so that we can really strive toward this vision. So thank you.
I appreciate that, Jessica, and I also appreciate the passion with which you bring to this conversation. I want to say a couple of things about operating budgets. We went through a period in 2009, 2008, 2009, and we've done the historical research on those budgets now, and that's really when those operating budgets came down. I think there was some expectation in 2008 and 2009 that the state appropriation would possibly rebound when the recession ended, and while I will say our state appropriation, which represents about a $70 million allocation to the university, has increased in recent years. It was up $4 million last year. Some of that's due to employee compensation increases that came from the state, the 3% increase that the state gave for state employees. For us, it comes in our state allocation. So part of that increase is there. But it has been incrementally increasing over the past 5 years, the state appropriation. It has not, however, returned to that certainly per student, funding per student, hasn't returned to that previous era prior to 2008. And so while some decisions that we made out of expediency in 2008 and 2009 represented, the best possible decision at the time, they did eliminate operating budgets in some areas, unfortunately. So one of the things that we are doing in this budget process is looking at operating budgets collectively across the campus, looking at base budgets as well. And some readjustments will have to occur. One of the directives that's gone to our units is that all of our programs need to have reasonable operating budgets. We have been using, in some cases, a salary savings to fund that operating, and we've been doing that consistently. And so we'll need to reset some of those base budgets in order to reflect what we're really spending the funding on, and we're in the process of doing that now. But you're absolutely right. We have to have appropriate operating for all of our programs, and that's a goal as part of this budget cycle. And honestly, we can't. We have to support our infrastructure as well. We've invested significant funding in infrastructure in the last a couple of years. Our expenses were up in FY16, and that was due to that one-time infrastructure investment that began in the FY15 year. It didn't conclude on the books until the FY16 year. It shows significant increases in things like goods and services that are related to construction projects campus-wide. We have invested significant institutional resources in trying to address that ongoing deferred maintenance issue that we face in some of our older structures. And we're also looking at our buildings holistically. We're looking at whether or not we need to consider, maybe restructuring how we're handling our footprint, because we have some buildings that are beyond their usable life. So that's something that's a long-range plan, of course, but something we need to look at for the institution so that we get that issue addressed by 2025. And that we're not still, waiting for a solution to that problem at that point. So that's one of the things that we're continuing to do.
I have some there.
Oh, go ahead, Paul.
Did you want to?
I have a mic.
Oh, you've got the mic. Okay. All right. We have some questions that were submitted to be read, so I will read some of these. The first one is the former Vice President of Finance, James Fletcher, being given a special accommodation, or is it ISU's policy to award paid leave for personal reasons?
Thank you, Paul. Can you hear me? I've switched microphones here. That question about our CFO, Jim Fletcher, is really more of an HR question about personal leave. Personal leave is available to employees in the state of Idaho. In terms of his own circumstances, I can't speak to that, but I can say that personal leave is something that is available to state employees and is managed through through our HR area and also the state HR process.
Okay, there was another question I think you've probably addressed. Will ISU settle the Perconi case out of court? I think you said that was in process with the courts. Is that right?
Yeah, Perconi is still pending in the courts.
Okay.
We will update you when we can.
Okay, this one's a little bit longer. The 2016 audited financial statement indicates that ISU has over $127 million in cash. Audited financial statements also indicate revenues have exceeded expenses for the past 7 years, resulting in larger accumulations of cash each year. Clearly, this money has not been used for maintenance expenses for the past 7 years, while departments report they must charge class fees to have funds for copying exams and purchasing chalk. Why do we continue to charge class fees? Given ISU's nonprofit status, do you have plans to reimburse students for the overages they have been charged with over the past 6 years?
Well, I'm glad that class fee question has come up because we have been in the process of auditing all of our class fees campus-wide. Some of you have been part of that process as chairs or as program directors. We're wrapping up that audit. It's been, we have hundreds of class fees, so it's taken a while to audit all of these fees. We've asked departments to make changes where that has been required, and we are looking holistically at fees as well as activity fees. We have multiple types of fees for students, and some are approved directly by the board, and some are at the discretion of the institution. Activity fees are approved by the board as part of tuition and fee approvals at the board level. Course fees have to go to support the course, consumables in the course. And so in the cases where we have found discrepancies there, we are reporting those and addressing those discrepancies. And certainly we're working with the state auditor on this issue, and we are reporting. Our internal auditor has been the one who's been handling those course fee audits. Relative to why do we have course fees? There will remain course fees. Some course fees will remain, and most of those are for very specific purposes within the course itself. And an example would be course fees that cover consumables like gloves or lab supplies for that specific course. But I can say that the state board policy on course fees has changed in the past several years, and we are changing those fees to address that change. And if you haven't heard about this already, you will be if you have a course fee that has been audited recently.
There was a question about the RISE complex. I think you addressed part of that. One of the questions regarding that is ISU looking into any financial irregularities regarding the recent employees that were either left town or were laid off.
Well, certainly the comprehensive investigation that is being done on the RISE complex includes the financials. So that is part of it. The financial piece is part of that investigation.
Okay, thank you. Several faculty believe that the creation of a community college in Idaho Falls will actually be harmful to ISU. It is difficult to believe that an enrollment drop in the freshman and sophomore class can be compensated for by an enrollment increase in the junior and senior levels, the so-called feeder concept. The Boise State University College of Western Idaho feeder model is not a clear indication of success. According to the State Board of Education spokesman Blake Yode, you are a member of the planning group tasked with installing a community college in Idaho Falls. Can you give us any evidence that a feeder program will help ISU?
Well, certainly we're hopeful that it will. The Bingham and Bannock counties together have some of the lowest to-go-on rates in the state, unfortunately, in a state that has some of the lowest go-on rates in the country. So ISU's service region has a very low national go-on rate. And that's a problem that we've known about for a long time. We've done a lot of analysis on our student population to try to understand what's happening with the go-on rate for K through 12, but also why we have retention challenges in some of our student populations, and what happens to those students when they leave ISU, And so those are all a part of this analysis that the steering group. They started out to be a grassroots group in IF that was passionate about a community college, and they invited ISU to participate after they had been meeting for some time. So I did attend multiple meetings. I think it's important that Idaho State is at the table for conversations about our service region, about how we are meeting the need of students in our area. Idaho Falls is part of ISU service region. We've been there for a long time. We will continue to be there. We're hopeful that a community college will expand the pool of students in that region. We have seen actually a shrinking student pool in IF, even though we do have multiple opportunities for higher education there. So certainly the steering committee that's looked into this, and several community leaders in Idaho Falls and the state board are very supportive of a community college opportunity in eastern Idaho. That has to go to the voters. As you may know, community colleges are supported by tax districts. The community in Idaho Falls has to approve that tax district on the ballot. And that will go to a vote probably sometime in the late spring, maybe May. And we'll see what the voters say about that tax district. Community colleges are supported by their tax district directly. And that's certainly the case with CWI as well as CSI and North Idaho College, all of which have a tax district supporting them. It varies, though. That tax district amount varies. I think they're saying it's $13 per tax household in that proposed tax district in Idaho Falls.
Okay, thank you. Do you have any plans to get ISU removed from the AAUP sanction list?
Certainly, this is something we've talked to Faculty Senate about recently. Last spring, the AAUP sanction list is a list that's maintained, as you know, by AAUP in order to address the challenges associated with that list. We need a faculty-driven effort. Faculty Senate has approached AAUP in the past year and has received some feedback. We'll continue to work with our local chapter and the national AAUP chapter to get guidance about, certainly about pursuing getting off that list. And we want to demonstrate that we deserve to be off that list as well. And we'll be working with those local chapters to do that.
Thank you. Do deans and department chairs in your administration have the authority to change a program's curriculum without involving the program faculty in the decision?
I'm curious about the source of that question, and certainly if somebody wants to talk to me about something, I'm happy to have that conversation. We do not want program changes to occur without the faculty, and that's unusual, I have to say, curricular changes that happen without the curriculum director or the program director. There are some cases where the state requires change, like in our general education, for example, that general education, state level general education requirements changed, and that, of course, prompted changes for our own general education program. But those were done with faculty input. That was something that provosts demanded at the state level. But does the authority exist? The state board has the authority, frankly, to change our curriculum, and they could direct us to change our general education requirements. They are a governing body. Fortunately, however, that has not been the case. The board wants faculty input. They've certainly demonstrated that they support that at all levels, and so that has been the case for our general education reform. We do not want to change curriculum without the program. Programs are responsible for delivering that curriculum. That is something that we expect the program directors to manage and the faculty to manage. So it would be an unusual situation. that would not be the case.
Okay, thank you. Under the new administrative structure, does the Executive Vice President have the authority to approve and recommend a faculty constitution to the State Board of Education?
Well, the faculty constitution, should the faculty senate go through a process and a process that results in the institution presenting a faculty constitution to the State Board of Ed, that would come from the president of the institution. It's the institution as a whole that's presenting that to the State Board. And of course, the State Board has the authority to approve it or not to approve it. The State Board utilizes the chief executive officers of the institutions to make those proposals. So should we get to that point, it would be the president who was making that presentation to the board.
Okay. How does a rank and file faculty member learn about the financial and structural discussions and ultimately decisions being made at the university or college division level? This is especially when a department chair or program director does not pass on any information or help in any way. What resources exist for the faculty member?
Well, in that case, I would encourage a faculty member to seek out an associate vice president in the provost's office or myself. Certainly, we want information to be disseminated at all levels. It's challenging, though, I have to say. I mean, it is difficult because we have a multi-layered organization, and there's a lot of information to convey. And so that is a complicated thing. Communication, that's why we're having these meetings, because it is challenging to make sure that these communication channels are functioning all the time. And so if you feel that you're not getting the information you need, you can certainly contact us directly. I would encourage you always to work through your chair and your dean, but if that is not working, you can also go to the faculty senate. A representative and faculty senate chairs would share that with me as well. We have an ombuds structure that faculty senate, I should say, has recommended some changes to the provost, and we're getting some feedback from deans about that recommendation from the faculty senate. And so we may be changing a little bit about how that ombuds structure functions, but certainly you have the ombuds function as well. But I would recommend, if it's something like budgets, to work with your dean and chair, and if that is unsuccessful, to come to the provost's office directly.
That's all the notes and questions that I have. Are there others that wish to provide notes or speak to the microphones? Other questions?
We're over.
Turn it back to you.
Well, I've kept you longer than I had intended to do, but I think it's important that we have these conversations. I think it's important that we have an open dialogue about things like the vision statement. I really appreciate Jennifer and Ben taking the time out of their schedule. I appreciate all of you being here during what is really a busy time. Normally, we will try not to schedule these meetings during a closed week, although some of you have said that you like that better. So we'll get some feedback from you all about that, since you may or may not be in class this week. But I appreciate your time, and certainly happy to answer any questions offline as well. And I hope that you have a great finals week and a wonderful and rejuvenating holiday vacation. Thank you.